Rach is a down-on-her-luck assistant to personal assistants, and she meets Press, an aspiring politician and definitely unlikable dude. She accidentally goes viral at the same time. The internet is calling it Boobgate. His PR person says they should capitalize on the fame. Press wants to win the election, and Rach, well, she needs to keep her job. Cut to some awesome fake dating. Hi, this is Becca from Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Read. What follows is a chunk of a longer conversation that I had with Amanda Gambill, author of Honestly, I'm Totally Faking It. This portion of the conversation focused on point of view and themes of power and powerlessness in the novel. At the end of the conversation, you'll hear me speak with Amanda about one of my favorite moments from the book. I include it in part as penance for never actually having written a review of the book, despite the fact that I love it, but also because it circles back around to the discussion of point of view. So, let's dive in. At this point in the conversation, I just asked Amanda about the single point of view of the novel. Press changes just as much, if not more, than Rach. Many authors would have positioned him as a co-protagonist by writing the book in dual POV, but Amanda chose not to, and I wanted to know why.
It's funny, I really never have considered writing dual POV. I've thought about it with probably every one of my books, and I always make the decision not to. It all comes down to my personal, like my writing style. When I sit down on a computer, even if I haven't plotted anything out, it's going to come out first person. Like that is very much my writing style, and I think I could change that, of course, but why would I want to? Like it's so much easier to just if that's what kind of comes naturally to me. I find dual POV not as compelling sometimes. I really like almost the mystery aspect of not knowing what the other person in the story, which, mine is the hero, the love interest. I like that you don't know everything about him. Like, I think that why would you not want to keep reading if you're like, why is this guy so grumpy? Like, what did he think about this? What is he going to do after he like accidentally kissed her and bolted? And like, I totally get that people want to see what he was doing right after that happened, but I think it's so much more compelling to still be Rach and still be that first person and like find out alongside the reader. Like you're the main character as well. And so I really, really just and I love thrillers, so maybe I'm just trying to secretly get some thriller vibes in all the romance books because I think it's like page turner. Like I hate when you wonder and you have this curiosity and then you turn the page and it's the guy and he's or whoever it is, it's the second POV. You turn the page and you're like, oh my gosh, what is gonna happen? And then he's like, oh, I was so mad about that, but I acted like I was happy. And like that is obviously the most watered down narrative, but that's just not that interesting to me. I really like curiosity and like how can I get someone to turn a page and still be like, what is gonna happen? And I personally just don't find dual POV the way I could tell that story, wanting to hit on those notes of like curiosity.
And speaking of Rach and being inside Rach's head, she is absolutely likable. She has so many strengths. And part of that is how much she cares about people and connects with people and sort of there's a warmth about her that is superlative in some ways. But I feel like the greatest strength, the greatest power that she has lies in her ability to make Press laugh. And it's interesting because I think Press is the only person that she makes laugh. When we're introduced to the character, she's so punny and awkward. And on the contrary, not only is she not making people laugh, she's sort of putting them off. But she makes Press laugh from probably the first moments, the first seconds of their acquaintance. I mean, before she even sees him, he's scoffing. And that ability to make him laugh builds and builds throughout the novel. And I realize that that is an attractive quality in and of itself, being funny. But it also allows her to be honest with him in a way that other characters are not honest, and to push back in a way that other characters don't really push back with Press. And I'm wondering, with all of the great qualities that Rach has, how far would she have gotten in this world with Press, whether as his fake girlfriend or as his assistant? How far would she have gotten without it? Because I do believe all those other qualities would get her in the door and keep her for a little while. But I'm wondering how much that humor seals the deal.
I think it is a huge part of it. It's the glue that seals the deal. Her being funny is her power. And so it is her, the classic hero's journey. Like that is kind of like her special power, or the fact that she can look at the world and be funny about it. And that completely disarms Press. No one has kind of surprised him before. So I think it's like her humor is what catches him off guard. And when you get somebody who has power, like he is a powerful person and he's scary and he's grumpy, when you get that sort of person on their back foot, you suddenly have all the power. And so I think that her humor really is such a big piece of her getting in the door and kind of staying in the door. And I think if she had just come in and been this very optimistic person who, like you said, is very awkward and not a lot of people think she is funny. Like Press is weirdly the only one. I mean, he would have like fired her. And I think I remember there's this scene in there. It was right after the boob gate situation, and they were standing out on his terrace, and she was like, "Oh, you're not going to fire me," and he was like, "Yeah, I already did. Like you should." And she makes a joke, like she tries all the methods that she's seen everybody else. Let me suck up to him, let me grovel, let me repeat what my boss had said, that he needs someone special or whatever. And then none of that works. And then she makes a joke. And it completely just, once again, throws him off guard. And I think when you can catch someone like Press off guard, he is a curious person by nature. Like his whole job, while it is all data and analytics and being an ultimate nerd, it's because he is curious. Like he is someone who looked up moss growth in the middle of the night. And so I think that curiosity plus Rach being such a strange, I think he calls her strange and fascinating. I think he is in such a box where everyone just says what he needs to hear, and he has grown up in this very structured kind of lifestyle, and everything that he does and thinks is planned. So her humor is that one, I'm trying to think of what a statistic analogy would be. Outlier, right? Like on the graph, it's the outlier. In the data, it's the thing that you have to throw away. And so I think that with Press, he's like, I can't figure this woman out. She is so strange. She's so funny. And her being strange is her humor. Her humor is a little weird. And she always does it at the wrong time. And it's like, why don't you know that you're not supposed to make this joke right now? So I guess it's like humor, that curiosity too, of blending that just, it makes her just so powerful. And then it just snowballs once she actually gains power of being his fake girlfriend. Then she's like, well, I can say and do whatever I want now. And then that makes their relationship like even stronger. So, and it all is kind of rooted in that humor. I think if she didn't have the ability to catch him on his back foot by being funny and quote unquote strange, I think she would have just been fired for sure.
Well, it's a dangerous prospect because even though Press is a curious person, he really doesn't like to let go of control. And one of the things that he does not really receive well is chaos and confusion, which every time, the first couple of times, I should say, when Rach sort of bursts in, she is the epitome of chaos and confusion. And there's ambivalence there because even though he's curious and even though he's excited by Rach, she represents a lot of things that scare him. And I think at one point, one of the things that he said is to believe in luck is to give up control. And another thing that sort of Rach represents is luck and fate and things meant to be.
I think that's completely true. And I think that is kind of like what falling in love feels like.
Yeah.
Like that it is scary and it is a leap. And I think that that feeling is how he feels about Rach in a way, if that makes sense. Like throughout the book, you're seeing him fall in, you're experiencing Rach kind of fall in love like slowly, but like you're seeing Press like fall in love.
Press has his way of dealing with his trauma, and Rach has hers. And a big piece of who Rach is that she leans into this idea of luck. She's been given a really rough hand of cards. She believes in signs and fate. She's into astrology. And I think that those things give her much needed hope when she's feeling powerless. She might not believe in herself, but she believes in the universe, and that's really important. I think on the other hand, these beliefs can kind of reinforce that sense of powerlessness, because another thing that she says is that once the maps of our futures are drawn, nothing can change them, and it can sort of leave you stuck. And so while I think it's really important that she brings in the idea of luck and the sort of the powerlessness and sort of the universe is in charge, I think that that's something that Press really needs to sort of think about. But I often wonder if those sort of starry-eyed convictions do more harm than good. Is that your sense?
I don't know if I necessarily have thought about it in terms of harm versus good kind of thing like that, but I think that her belief in kind of the universe and stuff like that is like the thing that she needed to change in a way. Like I think that was a good metric of seeing, in the beginning, because I remember what you're talking about with the maps, and like that's kind of it was part of like a little bit of a flashback scene with like her mom when she was younger and kind of something like that situation. And I think that that happened pretty early in the book. And so I think that her believing in the universe versus herself is almost like quote unquote the thesis statement. That's how you can track her growth. Like at one point, she's looking to anything to be a sign. I think she like drops something and thinks that's a sign. And then at one point, she's like, oh, let me open all these fortune cookies and kind of see what they're saying. And then I think towards the end of the book, I would hope that she's kind of shown that growth. And I think Press kind of gives her that growth. I think they're very much push and pull with each other in terms of this like luck versus control and fate versus believing in yourself. So I think there's a big push and pull there between them. And I think they give each other the other. So I think she tells him, like loosen up. Like it's not, you don't have to control everything. And I think you see that throughout the course of the book. Press's language starts to change a little bit. He starts saying like, oh, maybe I am lucky, and like maybe I do believe in luck and things like that. But then, he has that great quote that, how about she's like, are you sure you don't believe in luck? And he says, how about I just believe in you? And I think that that is really kind of such a great quote and such a great moment, because it really is like he gave her that power, and in return she gives him the power to like believe in something more than what you can control. Like you need to step back and not be so analytical and kind of stuck, because I think they're both at a crossroads, to continue with our little map thing. But they're, you meet them and they're both at a crossroads and they're both stuck, honestly. And so even though they are so opposite, I think they might be the most two opposite people you can imagine. I think that they're so similar as well, which is really fun to kind of think about how two people can be so different and come from such different lifestyles and even view the world differently, but still have so many things in common that can build a true connection. Which is
How are they similar in your understanding?
Well, I definitely think their humor is similar. And I think that, kind of going back to what we were talking about, like being funny and being humorous is like a form of both of their powers in a way. Because Press, you only see him be funny around Rach because he doesn't feel comfortable around anybody else in a way. So once he starts loosening up, and then you see him start to make little jokes here and there in front of other people. So I think their humor. And then I think one thing that I try to touch on a little bit in the book, and I think is probably the strongest connection point they have where they're not opposites, is that they're very much alone in the world. And I think kind of this relates to maybe one of the questions you already asked, or one we might talk about a little bit more. But I think that so much of the book and their lives are like outside perceptions. And I think that's kind of where you can start thinking about like the universe and fate and control and stuff like that. But who they are really is not really what their public perceptions are at all. And so I think that they find a connection in that as well. Like they can eventually over time realize the person I thought you were, the person I Googled, the person who like burst into my, home, and I looked you up and you weren't even online. Like that person and the person who's the girl who's Boob Girl from Boobgate, like that's not Rach. And like Press he even got a report done of who he is, and it's not true. Like it's not really who they are. Of course, who you are in the outside world is has impact and shapes who you are personally. But when no one is looking at you, who are you? And I believe that Press and Rach are very similar in that respect. When no one is looking at them, who are they? And they're funny, and honestly, they're both kind of homebodies. Like even stuff like that. Like they would live together so well. Like he would cook and she would tell him how to cook, and like he would clean and she would love it, and she would, she like decorated his house a little bit and he was like, I love it. So I feel like who they are truly, I think maybe how they feel. I think there's a version of who you seem and how you feel. And I think they connect on that feeling point. They're very both strong-willed, determined, funny, and alone. And they've had to spend a lot of their time being alone and in the shadow of who everyone thinks that they are. And that is a very unique sort of being alone, because you're not just like literally alone. Like people don't know you. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely makes sense. I'm wondering, so I wonder how soon Press starts to see maybe those similarities. One of the things that is really striking to me, so basically when he comes to her apartment and says, I need to get to know you because this isn't working. The way that our relationship looks on film doesn't seem authentic. Therefore, I need to get the data. I need to investigate you. I need to spend time with you. I need to better understand so we can look more natural. And it's clearly a combination of that being the case, that there is a practical purpose for him showing up and hanging out with her. But there has to be another part of it, which is that he just wants to spend time with her. And, one of the first things they do is embrace. I mean, I get the feeling that that's something he probably wanted to do for a while. So I'm wondering, does Press know, when he comes to her apartment, is he aware that this isn't just for practical purposes? Is he deluding himself and saying the only reason that I'm here is to get this information, this data, and to read her? Is there a part of him that knows exactly where he is?
I think he probably was data gathering, both personally and for their project of fake dating. I think I think you're right. I think he's starting to get a little intrigued in that scene. And as if you can remember, right before that scene when he showed up to her house, she had just kind of snapped at him. And like they had been to an event, it once again went really poorly. They're not like gelling well at all. And he makes some corrective comment to her, and she's just like over it. And she's like, why do you think you're so special? Like, why am I here if you're just never ever going to change? Because like you're wasting my time essentially. And for her, that was a pretty big deal that she like spoke up. And that once again, it puts him on his back foot. Like he's never been spoken to that way. And so I think right there, he probably went home and was like, oh my gosh, this girl who they met before they realized that they were going to have to work together. So he's, I think, attracted to her. And then he's like, oh my gosh, this woman that I had no real thoughts about is suddenly intrigued me beyond professional.
Mhm.
And I think that that is like, he's like, I need to get to know you. And then I think he starts to find out about her and he's like, oh gosh, now I like really like this girl, which is fun. But yeah, I think that he definitely starts in that scene to feel an intrigue that I think he needs to suss out a little bit because I think he doesn't know what that is. And they have the conversation in that scene too. If she's like, how many girlfriends have you had? It was like, I've had plenty, but you never really know like what does he mean? Because he immediately is like, that none of those relationships are real or whatever. Like he's like, aren't all relationships fake? So I mean, she is completely on the way to flooring him. He is not prepared for her at all.
One of the things that I think a lot about is the inspiration for this relationship. The inspiration really for the novel. You actually spoke a little bit about it in that interview with Anna. You said, I wanted to write a female lead that felt most like me, totally lost in the world because of where she'd come from. You also mentioned that you worked on a mayoral campaign that ended in scandal. And so those two elements seem like a really great fit, especially this sort of fish out of water thing, because that world is so strange to Rach. Essentially, I would argue, and I'm not sure you would, I definitely argue this is a boss assistant romance. It's spoken several times. They're sort of quibbling over whether or not he's really her boss. And technically, her boss is the boss at the agency, but I would argue he's her boss because he's the boss of the boss. Because anything that he says goes, and they're listening to him. Either way, though, there is a certain amount of inappropriateness just because of the amount of power that he does have over her. And I'm wondering to you, was the like many authors who are writing boss assistant romances, was the inappropriateness part of the appeal, or as sort of evidenced by having a discussion about that power dynamic and whether or not he's her boss, and whether even in the epilogue he demonstrates that he's uncomfortable leaning into the even as a fantasy, the boss assistant thing. So I'm wondering if the inappropriate was attracted to you, or was this a story that you just wanted to tell? The sort of the meeting of this Rach character in this mayoral campaign, and then found yourself just needing to navigate the inappropriateness. What was your relationship with the inappropriateness in this book?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And it's funny because I sometimes find myself going back and forth on my answer to that, honestly. Because I think, to your point, I don't necessarily call it a boss assistant. And there's what you write and then what you market. And in a marketing perspective, I don't really market it as a boss assistant. Sometimes I throw it in because I know like that is a trope in
Yeah.
itself, but I don't necessarily call it that. I do think that it's like slightly like a gray area with their circumstance because while yes, he is the boss he is the boss, I'm the boss, which is a double boss. And she is an assistant to assistant. So there's a good little separation there. But she kind of really, it is a weird dynamic with them because she does have more power over him in the sense that she has a lot of reputational power. And if she walks away from their little deal of the fake dating, then he's more impacted by that than her. She doesn't really have much to lose, and he has a lot to lose. So I think I do try to kind of poke fun at the fact that it's a little bit gray. Like you said, I have a couple references where he's like, I'm your boss. And she's like, you're not my boss. You can't fire me. So I do try to like toe that line because I don't necessarily want it to be this like taboo kind of boss assistant. You know, I worked at a place with HR people. And so I always think about like the HR, but I think in romance, the HR person is a little maybe less good at their job. So that's like my answer. It's both and none at all and some a little bit. The way I kind of approached it is I had the story for press and Rach well before I had any of the other parts of a story. Like I knew I wanted them together. I'd actually previously written a version of their relationship. It was completely different than this book, but it was still like the character Rach and kind of that what you said, the fish out of water. I had said it in like college, and it was a little bit more of that kind of dynamic. He was SGA president, and she was like a transfer freshman, so like she wasn't really a freshman, but she was. So that was kind of like a little joke. And I was kind of playing with. I wrote one version of that, and it was awful. So I was like, well, let's just stick that in the trash. And then I knew I was ready to come back to Press and Rage after a while of kind of sitting on that story. And it didn't make any sense to me because there's really no reason why two people in college can't be together unless you make up some sort of internal reason that I don't necessarily find that as compelling of a storytelling device. I like
Me too.
external conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta make
and
it loud and clear. Yeah.
yeah, I think that that's kind of how I start a story. I get the characters and then I think, okay, what is like the big conflict? And it's got to be external and it's got to be high stakes. Like, how can we make the stakes even a little bit higher? Because otherwise, you're just reading about two people talking to each other and deciding to be together. That's not interesting. So I had kind of initially had those characters and that rough outline of I knew who Press was. He's this grumpy, like analytical, and Rach is going to be, quite frankly, a girl who used to be poor to fall into this world where she doesn't really belong. I even kind of made like a tiny joke or reference or whatever in the book about Wizard of Oz and how she was like, I think I'm like Dorothy because, Dorothy wakes up and she's in a completely different world. And so I knew I had that as the baseline for the story. And then it really had to be, well, why can't these two people be together? Why do they have to be forced together, but they can't be in a relationship? And I don't necessarily think just a relationship being a secret is compelling. I think if I had wanted to just stop there with boss assistant, I think that would be a different conversation about how to approach the inappropriateness, because then it's just a secret. And then it really is the big conflict is HR is going to find out. And so I think it had to be this weird kind of connection point of you guys are trapped together because you're boss assistant. You didn't know that. And then this viral thing has happened. And so it's gone beyond just I am your boss, I am your assistant. And so I kind of what you said is like I came up with the idea of like, how can I get these two people to be stuck basically in one place and there's an external conflict? Why can't they be together? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to run for mayor. And then I was like, well, why can't you just date the mayor? And so kind of like it's so to your point, I think it started with the idea and then how to navigate that. And so I think that's why I have the little jokes and sometimes it's like, are they boss assistant? Is he her client? Is it like I try to make it a little gray so it's not just that's not the conflict.
Yeah, and Press is the one who wants to make it very clear that he wants them to be a team. And I think that he uses that word at least once, but on more than one occasion, he emphasizes, she says something about him or about herself, and he emphasizes, no, it's us. So even he is sort of thinking about needing to put a name to the kind of dynamic that they have. And it's clearly something that's important to him. I think that the trouble, and I'm putting trouble in scare quotes, I think if this novel were set 150 years ago, this would be like Les Mis level. I mean, Rach could be homeless. Like she says that Press is her only chance. That she says more than once that she has no one in the world, just absolutely no one. She's dealing with sort of insecure housing, with debt. I'm not even sure if she has access to, if she can get access to regular transport. These are all things that she talks about. And so press kicking her out, or sort of putting her in a situation where she loses this job, I mean, that is a really big deal. But it feels like Ethan thinks that she has a lot of power. I mean, he is complaining about the fact that she is making an impact on press to such an extent that it is rerouting a little bit his priorities, or the sort of his perspective. Like I said before, press change is so dramatic. To go from that place of needing absolute control and resisting things like feelings, and like feelings and facts is something that he talks about. Letting go of the data and just sort of living in the magic of love. That's a really huge deal. And in fact, he says he's willing to sort of give up these aspirations, political aspirations, if it means that he can't be with her. So on one hand, Rach could have very, very dire, personal circumstances. But on the other, one could argue she has more power because she makes that kind of impact. And is that how you sort of see it?
Yeah, I think so. Because, press even like calls her like life changing. So she definitely has power over press. And I think at one point she even comes to that realization where she's like, I can tell this man anything.
Yeah.
He will do it. And you see that. We see him quite literally fall to his knees and figuratively for anything for her. And so she has, I think, way more power. And in the book itself, she has secrets and he doesn't. She knows everything about him essentially, and she has all these secrets, and so that in itself, she has power over him, because he's like, hey, here's my heart essentially towards the end, and she's like, oh well, I will give you mine, but like on a bunch of conditions. And so that kind of is power in itself, because she's withholding her love like in a way, versus him towards the end, he's like, here it is, like I'm ready to do this for real. And so that is one form of power for sure, that she's kind of this life changing force. But if you think literally, like she has power over him in the sense that he is like a public figure and she's not, and so she could easily have like taken him down, like, kind of like a blackmail situation or like that. So I think if I think about Rach and her power in the real world, she has quite a bit of it, because she could easily manipulate like the truth. As the reader, you understand, like he is not taking advantage of her. She's not taking advantage of him in a real world kind of concrete way. But if you live in the real world and you're like, she could definitely like ruin his reputation, and he is rich, so she could have easily blackmailed him or something like that, which I don't really get into that with the book, because I think then we go down a whole checklist of how would this book be different in reality. Give me some brain candy.
There was something about, I think it's in chapter 9, don't let me nerd out by knowing what the chapters are.
Yeah, I love that.
Where they're hugging. And I think she asks, what are you thinking? And he says, I'm thinking that peppermint is a treatment for migraines or headaches or something. And it seems to come out of nowhere. And then later on, it's revealed that I think her shampoo is a peppermint shampoo. And having the opportunity to connect those dots. First, the question, why is he thinking about peppermint? This is really random. He must be, somewhere else. He's not paying attention. And then to find out, oh, on the contrary, he's very invested in the moment. And he kind of found a way, without doing dual POV, he found a way to let us know what he was thinking about, which I thought was really smart. And sort of the intimacy of that moment. It also felt kind of like symbolic in a way when the book is over, because she treats something in him. Her weird shampoo is sort of emblematic. She heals him. She offers him relief, and that hug, much like peppermint, gives him something that he really needed, especially someone I can't imagine what it's like to have those kind of migraines.
I love that. That's so fun. I think about that a lot, and I'm like, do people know that, like, do they get it?
The fact that it was drawn out, it's not like 5 minutes later you find out. It's like it's a couple chapters away. Again, in terms of someone who's not doing dual POV, it was a really awesome way to cheat and sort of give a moment where we can see what's going on in his mind.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's the beauty of single POV, is you get to deliver on little moments like that, instead of just going to the next chapter and he's like, she had peppermint shampoo. Like, not that they're all like that. I mean, facetious.
No,
but
it's the opportunity to gasp a little bit.
Yeah.
That sort of happy gasp.
Okay, that is it. I want to thank Amanda Gambill for all the time that she gave me. She was an absolute pleasure to talk to, and honestly, I'm Totally Faking It is really one of my favorite books. You should check out her other work too, including A Guy Like Him and For the Record, I Hate You. That's the title of the book. I don't actually hate you. I don't even... You know what? Don't worry about it.